Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of the Blacklist. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I like the opening to this because it was kind of unexpected. Because the way it was shot, well, set up and everything, I was almost scared because I was like, oh, is Hetty about to get it? And she didn't. Well, she got arrested, but she didn't get killed like I was worried she might have been. But I was like, okay, cool. But I was like, oh, that still sucks because obviously that's been a big issue for Reddington for a while now, is that his operation is under attack. I mean, to be fair, it's not like it's been the first time, but still, it's such a high-level attack against his organization, so it's like, cool. Hetty's not in the best condition right now, especially because all this is happening while Reddington is so focused on other stuff. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I love that there's a line where Reddington's got those two gangs together, like they're two bosses, and he's like, oh, basically this is more important than just one person. I'm like, that's ironic coming from you, considering all the manpower and just basically determination you have set on trying to find out who's responsible for the one person, because it's like, oh, one person matters when it comes down to who that person was. And we're talking about Liz, she was the most important person to you. So of course you're going to dedicate everything. But I just think that's the irony behind it. It's like, oh, you're saying like, right, we shouldn't let like one person be like above like making sure we keep all the peace and stuff like that. It's like, well, I guess Reddington's justification, it's like, yeah, but this is like one of the people we work for. This is my daughter we're talking about. So it's apples to oranges, but also it's like, yeah, I'm causing, some disturbance in peace, but it's not necessarily to any other criminal organization. I'm not going to run the streets with a gang war. So it's like my situation is different, but it's once again, Reddington always finds the loopholes around like, oh yeah, like there is hypocrisy in him saying that. I just love that. But, yeah, he's just so got the whole Liz thing on his mind. So he didn't see this blind side coming with, the FBI, because the task force is like, only one section of the government knows about Reddington's deal with the FBI. The other section is like, no, you're still free game. You're still on the top of the most wanted list. It's like every other branch of the government is still eyeing you. Every FBI agent outside of this task force is eyeing you. So that's how Hetty ended up getting caught up in the crosshairs. So luckily, Reddington was able to talk to Hetty, but it's like, yeah, getting her out of jail isn't going to be the easiest thing, because the thing is, she's a cog in the machine, but she does know enough about the operation to do some serious damage. So it's like, what are we going to do about it? It's like, well, Hetty could go one or two ways. She could either hold it down, ride or die, like Hetty did this episode, which is pretty dope, or it could have been the other way of like, she spilled the beans, I mean, Hetty's been loyal to Reddington for a long time. It's kind of crazy to think about, like, yeah, because, like, she came into the story just around when Smokey's not around him. Wasn't that home dude's name? Yeah, I think it was Smokey. Didn't Reddington throw him on a plane or something like that, if I remember correctly? It's kind of sad because, like, they both came into the story around the same time. Both joined Reddington around the same time, but Smokey wasn't loyal. So I think it was at one point when Reddington was vulnerable and Smokey tried to take advantage of it. Regardless. Which I hope this doesn't turn into a situation where Hetty tries that later on. I don't think she will, but there's always a possibility. But obviously, like, her biggest concern is like, right, going to jail, but more so than anything is like, because no one's going to be able to take care of my birds. My birds need like proper and very distinct care, which is very sweet. But I love when the guy's like, when the lawyer, the guy talking to her, being like, hey, so we're coming after you because we know who your employee is. We know you work for Raymond Reddington. And she's like, oh, do you think it's this Reddington guy I work for? It's like, oh, you guys have set me up in prison and stuff like that. It's like, but do you have commissaries and stuff like that, but do you have a place for, for birds and stuff like that? And the guy kind of looks at Marvin, and Marvin just kind of shrugs like, hey, she's got this. She's good. I love that whole aspect to it. So I even love that they brought in a new lawyer, but because they were talking about going to a judge or whatever because the government was circumventing it, because truth be told, it is a bit of a conflict of interest, but they're leaning in hard because they're like, no, we know Marvin is Reddington's lawyer. This will be our way. Like, if we can separate them, Reddington and Marvin not being in her ear, we can get her. So that's the whole point of it. So it turns out, though, the judge that they reached out to sent a lawyer there, and she's the one that ends up talking to Hetty, but Hetty was like, nah, I decided not to take the deal. And it's like, yes. And it's like, even she's like, what is it that convinced Hetty to do that? Is it loyalty or fear? And he's like, it's on a case-by-case basis. In Hetty's case, it's loyalty, so it's like, yeah, which is pretty dope. But, once again, he's had that problem more than quite a few times, loyalty issues and stuff like that, so... it's come up. I mean, I guess it's like any organization is going to deal with that, but he's dealt with it a handful of times over the course of this series. And I love how because at first you kind of almost think like, it seems like it's similar because like this is all tied together because Reddington wanted to go to the task force about the whole Hetty situation by because Marvin was like, oh, the seer, right? He's like, that's genius. And sadly, Cooper wasn't about it. And it's like, Reddington's like, oh, come on. Like, they skirt a little stuff here and there, but it's like, right. No other branch of the government knows about our deal with you. So they're going to do things about their way. And it's like, we can't really do anything for Hetty because the only one who has immunity is you and not the people who work for you. So... But I love that Reddington's just kind of like, well, isn't it? Like, he was basically like, I hope that one day this relationship we have goes both ways. Because it almost seems like, man, y'all ask for something, sure, I'm here to help. But the moment I'm asking for something, like, I want things to kind of go my way, you tend not to listen to me. But he's like, I hope that at some point in the future, like, this relationship will become more reciprocal where, like, we help each other out. Like, sometimes it's like, Reddington usually gets help from the FBI when he tricks them, which he did this episode, which we'll get to. But it's like, yeah, that's usually the only time, like, the FBI will, more often than not, willingly help Reddington do whatever scheme it is that he's doing that's going to ensure his power position or whatever. But I like the concept behind this episode being like the Arcane wireless. Basically, it being a phone system that is so secure that basically it makes catching criminals hard because the person behind this, the seer, has actually started branching out and now he plans on making it go wide spread, because there's quite a few out there now, and he's going to spread even more, and basically it'll make it so that criminals will be hard to catch because apparently this all ties back into like the wiretapping and stuff like that is kind of a big way a lot of criminals get caught and stuff like that on a federal level. But this will block all of that. It hides your location. I mean, he even tested it out, being like, oh, he called 911 and like used a specific threat that I don't even want to audibly say just because on the chance that might get flagged or something audio wise. So he made a certain threat, but that threat ended up the police couldn't find him and stuff like that after a long while. I love he was like, I want to play cards. I was like, wait, you just send in that type of threat and you're going to play cards. He's like, guess I'm playing solitaire then. But showcasing how good this technology is. I'm like, from a criminal standpoint, it's like, yo, you hit the jackpot. From obviously the everyone else's perspective, it's like, oh man, the worst thing you want to fall into a criminal's hand is basically a black box that won't make it impossible to track them. It's even something that apparently delete stuff remotely, so even people who get popped with it are like, oh, you can't use it, you can't figure it out, which Aram had to go work with his mentor, which he was super reluctant to do that because he's like, man, the guy always kind of put me down and always felt like I wasn't good enough, so Aram is forced to work with him, which I love that immediately. He was just kind of basically Aram's, like, one of Aram's most like endearing characteristics is him kind of fumbling, before he really gets to what he means to say, he kind of like twists and turns and swerves, and the guy's just like, stop doing all that. I didn't know there was actually, I don't remember the word now, but I didn't know there was an actual word for that. I mean, I guess there's a word for everything, but still. But I just thought it was so interesting. He was like, stop doing that. And he's like, right. And it's like, oh, wait, my boss's boss, your boss talked to my boss's boss's boss, and now I have to work. Wait, you have seniority over me? Like, you're technically my boss? He's like, no, like, I mean, if you look into the hierarchy of things, and sure, but I mean, obviously we're not going by the hierarchy because obviously you're better than me in every way. And it's just like, oh, poor Aram, like, constantly, like, dulling his shine a little bit because he feels insecure around this guy, and especially when he was like, oh, maybe if we do, Aram's like, oh, I found something. He's like, oh, did you something? It's like, yeah. It's like, then the guy's like, yeah, but if you do this, then maybe if that happens, then maybe this will happen, and maybe this will lead us to something. He's like, yeah, but Aram's like, being the half glass full type of guy, being like, but if it all works out, wouldn't that be great? And the guy's like, all right, fine, I'm gonna track all this. And then Aram gets a personal jab to the heart when he finds out, wait, Greylock, that was my business. Oh, you're the dude that was part of the business that left. It's like, wait, you're eyeing my job. It's like, yeah, why do you care? You left. And he's like, yeah, but still. And it rubbed him the wrong way, especially because it's like, the company was like getting investments of like 19 million. He's like, what I would have saw of that money, I would have saw 4 point some million. I'm like, yeah, that is kind of like, that's not fuck you money, but that's still pretty good money. And you're like, oh, I can see why that would sting, especially when the guy who kind of put you down, you're not the biggest fan of, who was kind of your mentor, the knowing that he's going to be taking your job, which I love that Parker's trying to make him feel better about. She's like, you mean the job you quit? He's like, yeah, that's beside the point. He's like, I didn't steal the phone because it was not his to begin. First and foremost, it's not his phone to begin with. And yes, I stole it because he's trying to take my job. Once again, the job you walked away from to be here at the task force. So, but I love that Parker was like, right, like, you know that he's good for the job and stuff like that. Like, and he was like, right. And she's like, see, I know it. So I know deep down you feel it too. He's like, you're right. You're wrong. He's like, no, he was like, you're right. No, not about how I feel, because you're completely wrong about that. But looking into it, he found out, wait, my mentor like completely screwed the pooch on this, because obviously like this tracing would have worked, but obviously he would have known that. So why didn't? You're like, oh, I was like, wait, is he in on this? Like that, this episode had so many interesting turns in that regard, and I thought was so fascinating. First, I was like, oh man, is he a bad guy? And even Aram confronts him, and he's like, oh, well, go talk to my boss's boss and stuff like that, and they'll co-sign it. I'm like, wait. At first, I was like, wait, are you saying the government is utilizing the Arcane wireless? Like, I'm saying, like, criminals are using it, but are you saying that the government is? Kind of, yes. But it turns out this whole thing is a sting operation, a large-scale sting operation that basically, because he's actually, Aram's mentor dude is the one who made the system. And that's why I was like, wait, if you made it, then what is who's the seer then? Like, he's another undercover agent. So this whole thing was a large scale sting operation, because the guy that the seer was going to see is big into human trafficking. And so now the guy was going to buy all the stock from him. And that meant his entire organization would have been like we've been able to take down a lot of very, very bad criminals, because it's basically like a long-term play. Yes, some small fry get away in the long run, but it's like the bigger picture, because that was kind of the whole point. He was saying like, Aram doesn't see the big picture here. And that's just kind of like, and Aram kind of like kicked himself into, for like, kind of basically screwing up a large-scale operation. Because even like Cooper was like, why didn't anyone tell us about it? It's like, well, no one, like, the fact is, because there's such a secret task force, it made it impossible for them to track down who Aram actually worked for, to bring them into the fold. So them being the task force that they are, ended up screwing them over in this regard. So I'm like, man, it's interesting how just like, I don't know if Reddington knew it would all come together like that. He took advantage of the situation, but I don't even think he calculated for all those things to kind of work out like that. Like, oh yeah, the task force won't find out about it, because anytime someone from the other side of things tries to like find out who Aram works for, it's like, no, it's going to be so much red tape and cloak and dagger that no one's going to find out. So I guess he knows enough about the infrastructure and everything to be like, I know how this is going to work, so it's not going to be possible. Like, it's going to give me enough wiggle room and time to get stuff done before the FBI ends up finding out the truth behind all of it. Because I was under the impression like Reddington was doing all this for his benefit. I thought he was going to get the seer on his side when he was like, oh, don't worry, when the time comes, I'll take care of it myself. I thought he was going to be like, oh, I'm going to pretend to kill the guy, but I'm going to bring him into my employ, just like he does sometimes. I thought that's where that was going to go. Totally didn't go that way, because this whole thing was a sting operation. Home dude was a cop. The human trafficker dude is dead, yet it stopped all those phones from getting widespread. And because of that, like, what could have been like large like takedowns internationally and stuff like that ended up backfiring. Well, it turns out the entire thing was mainly about getting Reddington. That's what this is all about. Hetty getting taken down, choosing the seer and stuff like that is because Reddington like figured that this might all be connected to. So he gave the task force, once again, unwillingly screwing up this operation, basically saved his operation. So I was like, that's fascinating. So it's like, yeah, like everything is so like, because it just felt like they were connected, but not as connected as you thought they would. And then turns out, no, they're super connected. The reason why Haiti got busted is because she was using these phones that, you know, were set up this way. Cooper, not too happy about it. He's like, yeah, sometimes Reddington was like, basically, sometimes we're aligned. This was one of those instances we weren't aligned. Hey, you took down a human trafficker, and yeah, the Arcane wireless thing kind of went bust, but you took down some bad guys in the first place because those phones are still out there, so whoever still has them is utilizing them. So it's not the large-scale project they were hoping and, like, criminal takedown they were hoping. It's still in play, but it's mainly going to be small fry. It's not going to be the big fish they were kind of going after. Well, in this particular case, the biggest big fish they were going after was Reddington, so he definitely knew he had to nip that in the bud immediately. So you add that to the fact is, it's like, oh yeah, like plus those two that were fighting over this here, yeah, you can take them down. I'm sure because the phones actually, they make it seem like, oh, like nothing can be traced. In actuality, they've been secretly recording every conversation. It's like, that's fascinating how that works. And I love when Marvin goes to visit the guy who was trying to make the deal with Hetty. It's like, oh yeah, like the fact is you're going to have to think about her when she's spending the next 20 years in prison. It's like, well, nah, she's not being put in prison. He's like, oh, how's that happen? Yeah, because you're going to mention your boss that we know about the Arcane wireless. And that if Hetty doesn't get released, we are going to make a few phone calls and make sure every criminal that still has those phones gets rid of them immediately, and you walk away with bupkis. Like, things are already kind of rough for you already because this whole thing imploded. It's about to be even worse. So the few remaining criminals that still have those phones will toss them immediately, and you will walk away with nothing. So he's like, oh, like, I don't listen to you. He's like, no, you don't have to worry about it. You're going to hear from your boss. Like, it's going to come up from super high up. And, you know, then you're going to get the orders to let my client go. So I'm like, yeah, wow. Making big moves. And I love that, once again, hopefully Hetty doesn't... She seems, once again, very... as Reddington kind of put it, she's got a big heart, and it seems like she took it with stride. She'd be like, oh man, don't worry, Reddington. Someone tried to come to me, but I didn't talk. She's like, no, that was one of our people. It's like, wait, you tested me? She's like, oh, good. Good thing you didn't tell me it was a test because I would have failed. It's like, so what would have happened? Like, oh, I succeeded like I did, or I would have... He's like, he said it before, like, don't get caught up in the what ifs. Let's not even focus on the grisly what ifs. You pass with flying colors, and she seems happy about it. So it's like, okay, because despite everything, it's kind of like, well, it worked out, but I'm still like, is that going to push Hetty to be like, well, Reddington was in a position to try and kill me? It seems like everything's copacetic, but we'll see in the long run. But what I also loved about this episode is Aram and his mentor. And it's like, cool, so you owe me a few apologies. And he's like, all right, sorry I basically blew up your entire operation, this thing that you were building, which is pretty amazing. Sorry about this, also stealing the phone from you, also suspecting you of being a traitor. And it's like, okay. He's like, you don't owe me apologies. In fact, you owe yourself one. He's like, the fact of the matter is, what I did was great, but what you built at Greylock, just looking at it, he's like, it's something spectacular in its own right. It's something special. But if you were willing to give that up, that something special to be here, then this is kind of the right, this is something special. This operation here at this task force is special too. And I was like, he's like, basically forgive yourself. Like, don't get so caught up in like what the opportunity you missed out, because if you're being here seems like it's worth it, you know? And shakes his hand and everything. I was like, wow. This episode, like I said, even that dynamic, I wasn't expecting that to be the end result, but it was a beautiful end result regardless. And even to the point Aram's like calling up like, hey, oh, you guys are celebrating in Tahiti. Private jet. Okay. No. Is Nick still working there? Okay. Tell him I sent over a resume. There's a guy who's the best guy for the job. And I'm like, I love that. It's like, yeah. Because the guy was like, yeah, I've seen so many companies, but yours truly was great. Like, it's something super special. So... You know, I think this was also a necessary episode for Aram to finally kind of get some closure, to finally be able to move forward without having. I mean, obviously, it's all that 4-point-some million, which could have been his, but now no longer is. That's probably always going to sting a little bit, but I think it was a necessary thing to kind of move forward. And Reddington kind of put the kibosh on any attack on his organization for now. At least, like, the government isn't having their way. But obviously, it's always a nice reminder of, like, yeah, they're looking for any other weakness, any any cracks in the armor to try and take you down. So like, don't get too comfortable just because you got your deal with the task force and everything. That this is there's a lot of other task force and organizations, other letters in the alphabet, government wise, that want to take you down. So like I said, I just thought it was such an interesting and fun twist and turn to the episodes that I'm excited to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.